Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, everybody, for this kind invitation to share our work from South Wales ex-mining valleys. So for over 8 years, we've been working together in the South Wales ex-mining communities in locales known for their industrial heritage at a time when all the mines have finally closed down. High levels of multiple deprivation continue to be the signature of these places, along with multiple, usually failed attempts at regeneration. Despite a rich history of productivity, when the black mineral flowed as gold capital from this industrial centre, exported as coal, iron and steel as far as India and China, these places have become symbols of post-industrial working class decline, areas of economic neglect. So coal is the black mineral that comes to matter in this place. The social imaginary, fueled by unprecedented media attention, conjures these places as out of time, as abject places that drain the economy, as eroded ecologies, as Katz suggest. Deepening abandonment is reflected in the politics of austerity, in which Westminster government cuts from 2013 onwards strongly impact on the Welsh Government's financial resources that lead to slashing youth services, health services, education budgets, and engendering a history of further erosions. Indeed, governmental policies unfold in schizoid discourses of regeneration and cuts, yet with little commitment to economic investment in these valleys. So what is there to regenerate? What's the source of life in the valleys? In short, it lies in the people, in place, in community resilience, in the liveliness of what Karen Barad calls our ongoing differential articulation of the world. So our story is about how young people come together to be more than. It's about how they fight against the stigmatizing images of the place, aided in part by Barad's diffractive methodology. Together we rework the quantum querying of space-time manifolds, and we rethink how coal comes to matter in the present as pasts erupt rhizomatically, iteratively reproducing the gendered history of place. And we retell the story through material configurations that together we create and once again bring forth in film, words, movement and artefacts.
While representations of mining as male labour dominate the history books, there is a less visible history of women's involvement in mining. Mining used to be a family affair of survival and necessity. Children and women worked alongside men 12 to 14 hours a day, underground in cramped and dangerous conditions, undertaking hard, back-breaking work. Typically, it was said that women would work for less pay than men required and would accept conditions that no man would tolerate. Basket girls as young as 6 regularly descended ladders into the pit to draw up tubs of coal. Women and pit lasses were routinely harnessed to wagons to haul heavy loads some distance, sometimes several hundred yards. Harnessed pit girls were a significant part of the heritage of British mines, a heritage that portrays both subjugation and strength. To some, the image of female masculinity was decried as unnatural and immoral. A certain Thomas Pearce wrote in 1854, "One of the most disgusting sights I've ever seen was that young females dressed like boys in trousers or crawling on their fours with belts and chains." A once rich history of productivity, now shamed and blamed as non-productive, has a complex gendered and sexual undertone. While the image of the strong muscular body of the miner is nostalgically invoked, drawing with it the reciprocal role of men and women above and below ground, the fit, active and strong body of women miners is submerged. Fast forward to the present day, and we find effective traces of pit pony and pit lass motifs pop up in contradictory interview accounts when young girl teens talk of survival and strength, as well as self-harm and sexual violence, refrains that leap across historical and contemporary existential territories. In our unfolding story, girls, corporeality and place, danger and a desire for freedom took at times an effective intensity. And it's in these effective intensities that we glimpse the more than. And so we turn next to our methodology to describe how we came to incrementally attune to the not quite spoken, yet strongly felt affects.
So supported by methodologically funded or engagement-focused projects over these years, we've had the freedom to experiment with, to reanimate and nurture what else research can do and how universities ought to be working in the communities that they hold responsibility for. So in general, we work with artists to co-compose workshops to enable expression through media beyond the spoken word. And much of what we do involves attuning and tending to the effective and multisensory dimensions of place through being there and working with objects, landscape, movement, light, sound, and noticing how they align and call our participants and us into the world. At times, nature, machines, animals, and digital media have been the elements of the assemblage that we have paid attention to.
The central refrain of our ongoing work over the past 8 years has been working with more artful interventions then, creating events and encounters that might surface and support what young people might already do and feel to survive and thrive in post-industrial places. This emphasis on young people's capacity, the prehension that enables us to glimpse the proto-possibilities or more than of their beingness. And this approach stands in stark contrast to current policy and practices which tend to view marginalised young people as needing to be empowered or transformed or rerouted. Our approach is about foregrounding young people's potentiality by co-composing research or engagement or activist encounters that might facilitate emergent, more open-ended ways of working. So by starting with young people's feelings, that could be anger, subjugation, not feeling safe, neglect or extreme surveillance, we attune to the marginality that young people experience together with their nascent wants, needs and desires. And we take this approach because, as Masumi writes, micro-politicality, social critique, has to come from within in the thick of things. So this approach is about shifting from doing something to a people or place, to connecting to the something doing, as Erin Manning puts it. And guided by the notion of art as the way, we creatively and iteratively do something with the something doing. And this iterative process of tapping into the something doing is where the artful, the politics of affect, and our responsibility as researchers come to play, and sometimes to dance.
What is at issue is responsibility, the ability to respond, the range of possible responses that are invited, the kinds of responses that are disinvited or ruled out as fitting responses, are constrained and conditioned by the questions asked, where questions are not simply innocent queries, but particular practices of engagement. So the conditions of possibility, of responsibility, include the accountability for the specific histories of particular practices of engagement.
And today our own particular practices of engagement have included working with visual artists, sound engineers, musicians, choreographers, sculptors and filmmakers. Long-standing relationships forged on trust and deep commitment to the kinds of responsibility Brad has written about. And each time we work, we learn a little bit more about the space-time matterings of specific histories of particular kinds of engagement. And we respond by convoking arts practices which might summon new forms of being, feeling and mattering to emerge, and in ways that don't separate out ontology, epistemology and ethics.
So after we'd undertaken approximately 60 face-to-face sit-down interviews with young people in 2 schools in one valley town, One deputy head disclosed his feelings of helplessness in face of numerous reported incidents of girls self-harming in his school. And he desperately needed help to understand a little of what was happening. This gave us an opening and an ability to work more intimately and carefully with a self-selected group of girls aged 14 to 15 years over a number of weeks. So in one session, Emma rolled out a large piece of paper and the girls populated it with the abusive comments, slang words and current expressions that were hurled at them in the corridors, playgrounds and streets, as they labelled the paper the runway of disrespect. So as we reflected on the project a year later, and Emma co-authored a book chapter with the girls, one of the participants, Libby, yelled and screamed with excitement and shouted to Emma, "Hey, you'd love this," as she rolled out the paper and crossed out runway and put runaway. So she went on to explain that runaway both expressed the ability not to run away from our feeling, but also captured our methodology, the way we progress by not knowing where our project might end up going next and how our ideas were always running away from themselves and indeed from us. Indeed, this project did spin off and travel in multiple directions, such as the feminist and queer activist resource Agenda that Emma co-produced with young people.
A couple of months later, I was reading Erin Manning's book Minor Gesture, and the concept of the runaway methodology took anchor further in how she writes about art, drawing on an old medieval definition of art as the way. Art, she says, is a process, not something to behold. To conceive of art as the manner through which we engage helps us glimpse the feeling forth true potential. And we've been guided by art as a process that maps the way toward a certain attunement of worlds and experiences. And in many ways, this concept perfectly captures the participatory process of working with artful methodologies. This requires a careful attention to the ineffable proto-possibilities of ideas as they roll, flow, and are transformed through words, artefacts, and new events. The methodology aims to make ideas become generative, as they hint at the yet to come, or the more than of an event in the making. And we try to make sure that intensive affects then are not stopped or negated or killed off, as so often happens in schools and other public institutions that control and regulate. And it's taken us years to trust in the process that Jane and the other artists that we've worked with have given us the confidence to try to become more radically open. Yet the process is not about following in any flow or direction. We have an ethical and political intention or attitude.
So although it may look to others as if the work runs itself, the imminent directionality actually involves a crafting. Crafting encounters with bendy structures, as Masugi says, that activate its most sensitive fold. It's a careful doing. It requires a studied openness to hold on to an event's ripe intuition. It's risky and demands our full attention, commitment, and utmost care. And this is what we're beginning to theorise as a living ethics.
This is what makes an event artful, that it remains on the edge, at the outskirts of a process that does not yet recognise itself, inventing as it does its own way, a way of moving, of flowing, of stilling, of lighting, of colouring, of participating. This is how artfulness is lived, as a field of flows, of differential speeds and slowness, in discomfort, in awe, distraction and attention.
So these runaway methodologies work on the edge, and our practices do not stop and start with the funding cycles. Most often our really generative work has happened at the edges, at the threshold of a funded project, at the in-between space of transitioning into future projects, or as self-contained small-scale engagement activities. Whenever we've tried to create a dedicated, fully funded space for our co-composed runaway methodologies, where we are explicit about choreographing the political with young people and communities, we found ourselves being co-opted back into structures, practices and policies of funded research machines that have constrained and immobilised our capacity to ethically attune to and craft research engagement activist encounters. In a sense, our generative work can be imagined as minor gestures that generate unpredictable openings that take the work on its way, below or outside the dominant research machines. We've also found that others find our runaway methodology disquieting.
So, to get further underway, we invite you to feel the surfaces and depths of two of the projects that foreground the complex assemblages of girls' bodies informing place, graphic moves and life support. And we trace the threads that became the way through effective practices that blur research and activism, and how we came to know with others what mattered, and how our shared creative endeavours informs, recasts, and opens up what is known, a proto-politics that glimpses into other worlds in the making.
So for 2013, we embarked on a turbulent journey participating in a large AHRC, ESRC funded programme, Productive Margins, Regulation for Engagement. For the first year, we embarked on what became known as the 4Ms project. It involved a number of phases in its first year, from speaking back to the GIS qualitative interview, mapping technologies that the police use to foreground young people's own spatio-temporal affective understandings of safe and unsafe, to more community activist encounters. So these included the Zebras protest about better street lighting, to national policies of sexual violence against girls and women. In the final phase, we worked with a range of artists. As we were making our art, the Channel 4 documentary series Skint was broadcasting across 3 consecutive Mondays. These images go some way to illustrating how, despite their intentions to show the ups and downs of poverty in post-industrial places, they linger painfully and voyeuristically on the more luminous sensationalist practices which pathologise the place and the people. Our workshops gained a purpose that we could not have predicted as the young people sought to counteract the media with images of the beauty of the place where they felt a deep sense of belonging. And our collective art making spoke to what place can do, be, and how they could reimagine themselves. So with our artists, Seth, Heloise and Rowan, 3 different workshops were offered to young people: mashing up the land, projections, and found sounds and street beats, each foregrounding different modalities, so image, sound or artefact.
In Mashing Up the Land workshop, the young people were invited to pulp newspapers and headlines about the documentary Skint. They chopped, shredded and tore up newspaper print along with found objects from the local areas, and stuck, built and plastered their own imagined sense of past, present and future onto the new forms. In the projection workshop, we worked with mini projectors to throw still and moving images on the local past, present, future landscapes onto bodies, so that bodies became place and place became bodies. Images refract onto feet, torsos, heads, faces and legs. So now we're going to jump to another activity that was unplanned and took place in an art room. So in the art room in a local school, we were waiting for Seth, a visual artist, to arrive. And in preparation, we roll out our long strips of paper on the floor and on big tabletops. And the big tabletops expanses seem to call us into being. Suddenly, we were gripped by the idea of lying on the big white spaces, and someone says, the last time I lay on a table was in a hospital waiting for an operation. So the body, the butte, anatomical, fleshy, strung together with muscles and tendons body is conjured in the space. A bodying event, dragging with it a multiplicity of tendencies. So, yeah, we decide to draw around our prone, still torsos. Being drawn around elicits affects, intimacy, attention, stillness, while another moves carefully around the body form, part hospital, part caring, part art room, part centre of attention. And we focus not directly on you, but an emerging outline, the line, the single breaking and reconnecting line navigates indentations, long arms, intricately meandering in and out of fingers and thumbs, not quite lying flat on the paper, a line swooping overhead, nudging around shoulders, the long, curving line travels, creates a new space. A form emerges. The shock of the new, as the person stands up at the end. Who am I? Who are we? What do I look like? A doppelganger me, a body form, bodies forming, informing in ways that call the persons into action again. An impulse to populate the new form with other forms. Some lay together and created a new body form. And with felt tips, charcoal and syringes filled with coloured inks, we fill the body, we re-inscribe it and we re-situate it in place. In this place. What matter materialises.
A ballet dancer dress burgeons out around the body of a very slight girl with the banner, "You can't save everyone." In another corner, metal mash-up lyrics of life and death, of relationships and belonging are populating the form as two girls recreate their favourite chemical romance album. The room is dancing once again, but to a new tune, slicing through the beauty beats of past, present, future in a different way. And the visual forms re-signify, re-subjectify, and we become more than one. This re-subjectification takes on another life. One of the girls was struck by an image in one of the local newspapers of an iconic 60s woman, hands on hips, legs wide, standing tall and backgrounded by an active, inactive post-industrial landscape. Captured, this figure is sunk into the newly coloured purple pulped-skinned headlines, a figure that she then decides to recreate in a body-forming pop-up activity. She asks me to outline her body shape. She then works very slowly and meticulously painting her outline, ensuring that the paint doesn't leak outside of the original outline. She tells me she suffers from OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and she's terrified that she won't be able to stay inside the lines. I help as best I can, keeping the paper steady. I guide. She's starting to enjoy how the figure is becoming Peter Pan-esque, and she chooses the words: freedom, independence, adventurous. Very soon we both realise that the term adventurous is too long for her leg to contain, a leg rooted in the map fragments of the cutout of the locale. This symbolism materialising in this moment isn't lost on me, and while she's struggling with not knowing how to proceed and wondering if she should begin again, I gently suggest that maybe her adventurous spirit can escape and surround her body. She lights up, embraces the idea, and once stuck, now continues. A teacher wanders in, a woman geography teacher. Peering with the newly created figure sparks a conversation about women's gendered career pathways and freedoms gained and lost for girls in this place. We gaze again at the figure emerging before our eyes, an adventurous spirit rooted in place, becoming more than place.
Politics approached affectively is an art emitting the interruptive signs, triggering the cues that attune bodies while activating their capacities differentially.
So the final project that we're going to share with you started when a group of young people living on an estate that was pathologised in very particular kinds of ways reached out for help. So in this account we show how their participation in the project ran away from us and became a kind of proto-politics emanating from the young people. And it started with a tweet. And an inspiring youth worker recognised the urgency of what this group of 15 girls were trying to articulate. And Emma came across the message and tweeted back, "I'll see what I can do." One of the phrases on their mind map that really struck us was, "Nearly all of us cry at night." This phrase shocked us and reverberated throughout our work together with the young people, bubbling up to consciousness that troubled and interfered with all that we did. So on meeting the diverse group made up of girls and a couple of boys, troubling tales of everyday violence emerged. They told us of the embodied and digital sexual violence experienced across complex networks of relationships with boys they knew and they didn't know, who were verbally abusing them with micro-intentions to hurt and harm. And the girls were angry. And in our very first meeting with them, they expressed this in a strong desire to make boys feel the pain they feel. They told us in unequivocal terms that they wanted to tie boys to a chair, shine a light onto their eyes and interrogate them. So we read the term boy as a condensation symbol for a wider range of feelings of patriarchal regulation. And their descriptions hint at what Sue Austin has called women's aggressive fantasies, characterised by a strong desire for revenge. And we're struck by the physicality of their imagery.
What do you do in a participatory club project when young people tell you directly they want to create a real life torture scenario, not a representation, the real deal? Well, what we did was, to borrow words of Haraway, we stayed with the trouble, we listened with a deep yet studied open attentiveness, and we tried effectively to tune into their desire without closing it down. We tuned to their anger and their expressed marginalisation and pathologisation. And so we set about to work with them in ways that stayed with their feelings of, in words of Sarah Ahmed, being up against something. And we imagine this as a complex oppositional gender and sexual past where sedimented binary gender roles surface and resurface. And we iteratively work with being for something, but as something yet to be articulated and yet to be.
So they told us that they wanted a collective experience, and they chose to go on a residential weekend to an adventure park, and they also chose the physical activities they wanted to do. These were the giant swing, the zip wire, aero ball and rock climbing. So together we orchestrated the activities so that the physical events were followed by art-based workshops. Following the big swing activity, we created a workshop that included the artefacts that had been mentioned as part of the revenge fantasy, such as a chair, rope, hammer, nails, screws, labels, and positioned them in a room with tables laid out with plasticine and glittery thread, feathers, coloured paper, pencils, etc. And we introduced the workshop with the simple instruction: this is a body.
Things started slowly as the group splintered and fractured, unable to find a way in. Sometimes together, sometimes apart. They very quickly, though, began to create quite an incredible artefact. Their pain emerged swinging from struck-up labels, and the chair was moulded, hammered, and nailed. One girl crafted a small sobbing plasticine figure which the group placed in the centre of a blackened seat. In stark contrast, the tall uprights of the chair were being embellished with pink and blue, sparkly, sequins threads. Labels here, pure gold, no words. Butterflies hover and flutter, feathers barely attached shimmer with light. And one of the uprights is protected with luminous orange and green. Is this a warning beacon? It isn't a chair or body that beckons you to sit, but one that draws the gaze to the intricacies of pattern, shape and twitching movement, inviting you to touch, read and puzzle over. This anti-chair asks, why? Created with objects of the revenge scenario, the anti-chair finds a way to be for something. A passage that transforms the initial crude revenge antidote into something more, a great deal more. The anti-chair is perhaps a minor gesture, chipping and hammering away at the everyday violence of their microsocial world, making raw pain and beauty visible, reanimating the not yet but aggressive fantasies. And in later festivals, campaigns and policy advocacy, the anti-chair has found its way into the world, spreading its effects far and wide. It's come with us into places and spaces that young people do not always want to participate in. And it's worked its way into policy and practice forums, counterpoised in rooms amidst other chairs and bodies, such as a national panel for advancing gender equity and healthy relationships at the launch of the Agenda resource.
So back to the physical. So the zip wire activity fulfilled the group's desire for a challenging physical activity that literally took them and us to the edge. Fear, exhilaration, and sometimes panic bubbled and roared in eruptions of laughter, binding us together through our shared experiences of terror and joy. After the activity, a large carted paper was rolled out and everybody wrote or drew something on it, and the runaway landed the experiences as expressions marked on the paper. Words, phrases and drawings captured, coded and diagrammed the residues of intensities, creating effective traces of the prior event in which our bodies had been harnessed, launched and dropped over the threshold. The physical precipices, entangled with adrenaline, perspiration and sleep deprivation, took us to the edge, where the present vibrated with ineffable memories of mining past life. The climbing harnesses that we donned entangled our bodies in physical supports, pulleys and contraptions that launched our bodies into the force fields of gravity, centrifugal pressures that buffeted and coursed through our stomachs, guts, thighs, bottoms, legs, arms, breasts and heads. We soared and tumbled, Peter Pan-esque, through crisscross vectors of sun-slashed air.
Turning to another medium of expression, Heloise sourced for us sketches of delicate white silk. The silk was as light as gossamer and refracted light from its shimmering texture. So from words, the anti-chair and body forms, we moved to body images as we traced around each person to create a doppelganger image in 2 dimensions. The body forms refracted postures experienced by the physical activities and depicted exuberance, jumping, stretching, standing, as well as bodies cut in half and lying prone. And the way ink was applied to the silk cloth created patterns that were intense, light, delicate, heavy, cosmic and surreal. And one body, as you can see, is completely painted black. One girl approached her body silk form with pastel-coloured ink and created a butterfly right at the point where the stomach would be positioned. She worked outward from the place where she most intensely held the fear that developed as she was hoisted off the ground on the giant swing ropes, pleading for it to stop. As the delicate rings of colour spiralled out in undulating circular strokes of pastel shades, the fear seemed to be transforming into swirling patterns of beauty, engulfing the heart and chest area. Her artwork seemed to be pumping life back into her airy being. And she had been the one who'd been most afraid, but also most determined to go on the giant swing. These creative events enable us then in the group to relive emotions of marginalisation, fear, anger, jealousy, being left out, pain, repeated again in the eternal return through environments that this time were designed to hold us securely. Our rejigged bodies found new corporeal intensities, and together we and they started to feel again the traces of the past, the micro-pasts, cut through and apart with the macro-histories of life. Molar movement patterns diffracted through the minor gestures of the habits, tics and rhythms that have stilled girls into submissive postures now filled a more affirmative motion, motions assumed by swinging, flying, plunging moments and movements that intensify the power of existence.
So on our first meeting after the residential, when we all met up in the youth centre, the sun shone for the first time in weeks. The heat and beauty of the day called us outside and instilled a desire to go into the wilderness. Young people took us to their secret place, a people's parliament, made of walls of rock, limestone pavement and dramatic cliff edges. They took us up the Moorless Mountain to the Moorless Castle. The warm wind in the air called us to create our body-formed silks as banners, So we bought 3-metre-long bamboo poles and stuck the silks to them. Instantly, the poles became arrows impelling us to strike up mock combats, creating crisscrossing lines with their shadows on the concrete floor and against the blue sky above. As we ran and danced joyously up Morlas Mountain, poles became spears and we became warriors. And with each step, we learned more about their relationships to this place, the cave and the couch in the tree where they huddle, extracting themselves from suffocating social media spheres, and where they came to talk about their troubles and their conflicts. And at the top of the highest plateau, on top of the world, on the highest rock pavement circle that formed the remains of Morlas Castle, were panoramic views around the valley territories. Buffeted by gusts of wind on all sides, our wind-filled sails billowed, rippled and flapped loudly, bodies cavorting, gyrating and cascading. Their shadows danced across the sunlit landscape of the Brecon Beacons and Glamorgan valleys below, and surging with pride, their body forms were filled out and we were filled up. Our gaze stretched far and wide around the lush landscape that now conceals the entrances to hundreds of miles of underground tunnels hidden beneath the grass, trees and greenery that grow atop the once brutal industrial landscape of rock, mud, heavy with black coal soot, scarred by the machines and pit wheels, railway lines and factory walls. On our guided tour of Morlas, the joys and the pain came in very quick succession.
On the way back down, we interrupt a Sunday ritual enacted by the family whose son had thrown himself off the cliff. The girls tell us that 3 young men had tried to take their life in the same spot where we were flying our body silks. But more than this, we learned that the group had been walking at Morlas Hill, a place where they came, as we said, to sort out their problems and conflicts. And they'd seen one of their friends, a boy, getting ready to jump. The effort to restrain the boy, who was determined to jump, involved a monumental physical tussle, as the girls described having had to draw on all their physical strength and body weight to fight against the force of his will. In this physical struggle of body on bodies, we found echoes of earlier struggles, the struggles of men dragging bodies from the collapsed tunnels during one of the many mining accidents that fill the history of this place. We feel the ineffable force of the desire to save life that goes hand in hand with the dangers of mining. And we return to the initial meeting when the girls spoke of wanting to tie a boy down and make him feel what we feel. We finished this final scene with their film Life Support, a film that's created and crafted over the ensuing weeks and months with this Runaway methodology, a film which actually had originally been intended to inform the adventure part of how we worked together to push our bodies to the limits. But it rapidly became entangled with the austerity cuts that was pushing the very life force of the youth centre to its limits. The film contains selected quotes from over 500 messages sent as part of the fight to keep the youth centre open on a youth-led Change.org campaign. The film has become their protest film, and it was aptly premiered on International Women's Day.